to look at sustainability. My theory is that the same thing is true as you introduce technologies. You know, you really need to develop relationship with local businesses, so there's an infrastructure there to sustain technology after a project, for example, terminates and finishes. You don't want the benefits that have been introduced then, you know, not to be sustainable over the long term. So I think working both with governments and local businesses is becoming increasingly important.
We had an interesting experience talking about HIV/AIDS in one of the HIV/AIDS clinics that we've been talking to in South Africa. And South Africa you deem to be quite a developed country, certainly in terms of Africa. And yet in the clinic, over 40% of people that were going into the clinic didn't have a mobile phone, or didn't have a mobile phone number. And yet the clinic used the mobile phone number as the ID for all the clinical records. So for 40% of the people going into the clinic, they had no records, they had no history, they didn't know what these people were doing. And so we've been talking to them about implementing our system in order to give simple ID records, cheap ID records to these people coming into the clinic. But it also then means that they can actually communicate privately with these people coming into the clinic. They can send messages to them, they can say, here's your appointment, this is the time of the appointment, this is the address. And what we can also do is start doing fancy things like actually whitelisting the clinic's phone number. So they can actually borrow any phone on the network and make a free phone call to the clinic to tell them they're not going to attend. So, some of the interesting things we found.
Just to push this in a little bit of a progressive direction, I guess, which is differently than the way you're talking about experiences you've had, here experiences you might have going forward. All governments, you know, companies, NGOs, they're all social institutions, and they have certain ownership rights to things. And I think one of the challenges that you're going to see, that we should see facing ourselves going forward, is the notion of owning the data that exists. Of course, the data needs to, you know, information wants to be free and all of that, but it's not necessarily the case. What we do see, and this is something we've been thinking about ourselves, is that the institutional mechanisms we have for adapting to change are slower than the kinds of changes that you'll see based on the kinds of data that you have, right? And so the notion is to bring institutions along such that they can start changing at a more rapid pace based on the kinds of possibilities that people see, right? And that's going to be a challenge on a global basis, and it'll be differently experienced in different countries, we think, right? So those kinds of changes in the way institutions change are going to be very interesting to thinking about the kinds of barriers, not only national, but other forms of institution as well. Other questions?
We are.
All right.
Great.
Well, thanks very much
Thank you.
to the panelists.